Hello and welcome to Cryptobotany. On our channel we cover quite a few topics in the range of strange and paranormal. Nothing is really off limits when it comes to those stories, but to date there is one subject that I never even considered talking about before. That would be Cryptobotany, and it was suggested by a longtime viewer by the name of Donkey Kong 2.0, so I thank you for that. I know a few of you probably are thinking, Cryptobotany? You mean cryptozoology? Nope, you heard it right. While cryptozoology is a study of unknown animals, cryptobotany is much the same, but rather than animals, we are looking at plants. A lot of these plants dwell within the realm of dangerous, and being as such are frequently talked about. However, I want to mention species that aren't inherently bad, but of course I will be talking about the deadlier variety as well. So apply appropriate bug repellent, bring plenty of water, and let's go on the hunt for these mysterious plants. Within the science fiction culture, we have many representations of dangerous man-eating plants, which leads many people's minds to think about the one named Audrey II from the movie or musical Little Shop of Horrors from 1960 and later remade in 1986. While the plant in that movie was actually an alien species, it does fit with the most common depiction of a man-eating plant, which is based on the Venus flytrap. This can be seen in many movies and even in video games with the piranha plant from Mario and the chomper in Plants vs. Zombies. Oddly enough, I couldn't find any real-life reports of this type of plant being said to exist, even though I really wanted to. Yet, within cryptobotany, many of these plants aren't any less dangerous, and they can be all types of different species, many of which you wouldn't assume to be different by appearance alone. So starting off our journey, I wanted to get probably the most famous but equally debatable Madagascar tree out of the way. The story goes as this. In 1870, a letter was sent to a Polish botanist named Dr. Emilius Friedlowski from a German explorer named Karl Lesch. In this correspondence, Karl described his adventures in the jungles of Madagascar with a tribe he befriended called the Makotos. This tribe allegedly took the explorer and his partner Hendrik to a mysterious tree that they called a tepe. He described the tree as being shaped like an 8-foot pineapple with brown skin. It had 8 11 to 12 foot long leaves covered in sharp hook-like thorns draping over it. Its flesh was as tough as iron, and it had 6 almost transparent tentacles between 5 to 6 feet long, waving and whipping about, pointing straight up in the air. I would imagine that they would be moving almost like a writhing snake. The plant had 2 flat surfaces on the very top, and very fine green hairy 8-foot-long tendrils coming out from underneath those flat surfaces. In the top of the plant it contained a clear, sweet, odorous liquid. While viewing this odd plant, the tribe forced one of its female members to climb on top of the plant and drink some of the liquid. It appeared that in doing so, she immediately became overcome with hysterics. It was at this point the plant sprung to life, and using its tentacles and leaves it began to wrap them around its victim. This was done in much the same way as a constrictor snake would, and it produced the same effect. The plant kept the newly cocooned body up in the air for over a 10-day period. After a while, Karl returned and saw that the leaves had once again relaxed, but now there was a human skull remaining at the base of the tree. In the letter, Mr. Lesch mentioned that he decided to call the plant Crinoidea degina, after the family name for a starfish and a famous Bombay physician, Dr. Bawu Daji. Now, many people through the years have tried to authenticate this story, and struck out on all accounts. I should note that within this story, Karl Lesch is sometimes referred to as Karl Lesch, and even Dr. Friedlowski is shown as Friedlowski. This is really reminiscent of the Kincaid Cave story. Although, being as how the names are close, I could see it simply as a writing error. All that aside, with investigations, there has been zero information found about the Polish botanist Dr. Friedlowski, Karl Lesch, the Makoto tribe, and even locals claim to be unaware of any legends involving the plant's existence. This is really troubling, and it has led many simply to rule this out as a tall tale. There is hope, though, that this story is real. I'm not sure if that's actually a good thing or not. In 1995, a Canadian researcher named W. Rich Benedict found a news clipping from 1875 that described this same event, but rather than it being found in Madagascar, it was actually in New Guinea. So to this day, no one is certain if this story is true or not. Moving on, we find our next plant in Zululand, South Africa, and it's called the Umdebi, or simply known as the Tree of Death. This plant was first mentioned in 1870 by writer Henry Callaway, and then it was later talked about by Reverend G. W. Parker in 1882 while he was a missionary in the area. The species is said to come in two forms, one being a tree and the other a bush. With the tree, it has two layers of bark, with the outer being dead and peeling, and the inner being fresh. It bears a black fruit with a red base, supported by a long pole-like stem. The leaves are very glossy, but rather brittle. The most obvious characteristic is the remains of many types of animal carcasses around the base. While this plant doesn't attack its prey, everything about it is highly toxic. In some cases, it is even said that it can produce a toxic cloud if threatened, but it is more likely to come from the flowers when they bloom. Once the victim nears the tree, the poisoning effect can cause bloodshot eyes, headaches, delirium, and this eventually all ends in death. Yet it is also said that sometimes symptoms don't arise, but death is instantaneous. The native people have utilized the fruit of the tree to produce a cure against the effects of the poison, but in order to collect it, they stay upwind. Although, from what I read, every part of the plant is toxic: leaves, bark, and of course, the gas. Now, many will rule this plant out, since there is very little first-hand knowledge about it, but I was able to find a few cases where the descriptions may be accurate. A tree called the manchinal, or little apple, is found in Florida, Bahamas, Mexico, Central America, and South America. To the unwary, it looks like a simple apple tree, but it acts much like the previously talked about Tree of Death. Every part of it is highly toxic, and even breathing the air around it can be deadly. According to reports, the fruit is sweet at first, then takes on a peppery aspect, and then turns to a strong burning sensation. The last description is due to the toxic chemicals in the tree, many of which have yet to be identified, which causes skin blisters. Even if you were to stand under it in the rain, the water mixed with the chemicals from the leaves would cause severe blisters. The sap has been known to damage the paint on cars, and if the wood is burned, the smoke can even cause eye damage. Other than this tree having green leaves and green fruit, it certainly seems like the same plant as mentioned before. As promised, I'm going to step away from the deadly plants for a moment and talk about two that are equally fascinating. The first of which is very odd and is called the vegetable sheep. The plant, if you call it that, was written about in many texts from China, Persia, India, Israel, and to a degree, Ireland. I say to a degree, since the version in Ireland produces geese. According to the legend, this plant will grow, for the lack of a better term, a fruit that is in the shape of a sheep. While that is incredibly odd, apparently this sheep will act like the normal animal, grazing the grass around the plant and producing a very fine, sought-after wool. The sheep is attached to the plant by a stalk and can only move so far away from it. Once all the grass is eaten, the sheep will die and the process will start all over again. It is also said that if the stalk is cut, the sheep will die, although this process wasn't done easily since arrows were needed to do so. The wool was said to be used in head coverings and clothing. In Jewish writings, this being was called Yahudah, and its bones were sought after for divination and ceremonies. However, within these writings, this same plant could produce a fruit in the form of human, and it would kill any person or animal that got close to it. Obviously, this story needs to be taken with a grain of salt, but it is interesting that the same creature was talked about in so many different locations. A few people theorize that the stories depicted the common cotton plant, since it wasn't well known in Northern Europe at the time, but many of the tales include graphic details of people eating the sheep. I don't know too many people, if any, who would consider eating a cotton plant. All in all, I thought this was a fun and interesting story to include. The other non-lethal plant comes from many areas, but is largely mentioned in Greece, and goes by many names, but is commonly known as Dodona oaks. We're going into a little bit of mythology here, but it is still interesting, and a change from the death and destruction of all the other plants in this video. These trees, and the ones like them, had the ability to speak, and more often than not, offered prophecies. In the famous tale of Jason and the Argonauts, their ship, the Argo, was built out of the wood from those trees. It then warned the crew of any impending bad weather or calamities that were to happen in the future. Within many stories, not of Greek origin, trees are prominently shown as advice givers. While there isn't much to say on this topic, I wanted to at least mention them. Okay, let's move back into the dark and deadly territory, but still roam about in the more mythical realm. In Irish folklore, there are many odd, fantastic, and sometimes deadly creatures, but I think our next entry takes the cake as one of the weirdest. The plant I'm talking about is grass. Yes, grass. It is known as Fear Gortach, or simply hungry grass. It is said to not look any different than any other grass, but it certainly behaves differently. Anyone unfortunate to come across this will suddenly feel perpetual hunger even if they had just eaten, and become really weak. In many cases, these two symptoms cause the victim to collapse, and while it is never directly mentioned, it is strongly suggested that the body is then consumed by the grass. Those who do survive their encounter still carry with them the insatiable hunger that eventually leads to death. In one story, the real location, called Hungry Hill, was said to be covered in this grass, and as such, the locals avoided it at all cost. Those who didn't heed the warnings were never seen again. A young man decided he wanted to try fishing in the waters near the hill. He left his house in a hurry without eating, but took his breakfast with him. The boy ignored all warnings about the grass and walked right up the hill. As he went, he kept taking bites of his breakfast. The grass was said to wriggle under his feet and try to ensnare him, but every time he took a bite of his food, the blades let go. Finally, he made it to the safety of the beach, where he met another fisherman. In discussing the dangers of his trek, they soon realized that due to eating food while crossing, he was able to stave off its effects. Many theories exist as to why the grass exists, with many stating that it was planted by angry fairies, while others state it has its roots in the potato famine. Even as such, some claim that the famine occurred due to the grass destroying crops and causing the hunger. Others state that the grass acts the way it does due to a dead body being buried under the soil or just in the field. Some even state this phenomenon is the manifestation of a spirit of a man by the same name. Who would have thought grass could be deadly? The last plants in the cryptobotany field that I want to discuss are going to be lumped together since they are incredibly similar. The first of which is probably the one many of you have been wondering if I would mention, and that is the Aveo from South America. This tree was first mentioned in J.W. Buell's book Land and Sea, published in 1887. According to the story, it has a short, thick trunk, and it has many tendril-like arms protruding from the top, with each arm having many sharp barbs on them. The arms drape over the tree, touching the ground, lying in wait for any unsuspecting prey. While the tree is normally known to eat larger insects, it will take a human as a meal if given the chance. The arms wrap around its victim and squeeze the, dare I say, juices out of it, and then will throw the carcass off to the side. The name Aveo is said to mean "I see you," but some stories have taken this literally and claim the tree has a single huge eyeball on its trunk. Another very similar plant to this is located in Sierra Madre, Mexico, and it is known as the snake tree. Its limbs look aptly like snakes, without the head, and if an unwary animal gets too close, it will entangle its prey and drag it inside it. The remains are then deposited at the base of the tree. It was said that the limbs actually had suckers on them, much like octopus, and that is how they were able to keep such a firm grip on their prey. In one story, a man touched one of the branches and it immediately latched on. The man freed himself, but in doing so, it tore the flesh from his arm. This is also very similar to the stories that are known as vampire vines, which were said to suck the blood from victims, but not eat the flesh. However, those stories have been found to be completely false. So as I end this video, I was curious, what are your thoughts on these really strange plants? Also, was there one of them that you found more interesting than the rest? I know I won't look at the forest the same way again. If you haven't yet done so, do please consider subscribing to my channel for more content like this, and also I would greatly appreciate it if you could share my videos with someone you know who may be interested in this type of genre. With that, be safe, and I'll see you in the next one. Later!